AG1, introducing AG1 Next Gen, a daily drink with vitamins, minerals, and probiotics to support overall health. Learn more at drinkag1.com/science.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Charlotte's transit plan, long stuck in the slow lane, suddenly went from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds. Despite dim hopes for passage in the General Assembly, a bill authorizing a referendum for a 1-cent sales tax increase for transit suddenly sailed through both houses and landed on Governor Josh Stein's desk, where he promptly signed it. The final hurdle will be the Mecklenburg County Commission. They are highly likely to give this referendum a nod, and if they do, we will be asked to vote on it in November. The package will fund transit and transportation development for decades and generate billions of dollars. Proponents describe it as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve our transportation options and infrastructure, but there are those who remain disappointed that it won't provide enough funding for light rail to Matthews, and others worry that it doesn't do much for lower-income residents. Despite the fact that we've been talking about this plan for years, many still don't know much about it, and they haven't heard the arguments necessarily from both sides. So we're going to take this hour to explore some of this. We're joined by Leigh Altman, Mecklenburg County Commissioner at Large and Chair of the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Robert Dawkins is Political Director of the Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Ethics Coalition of ActionNC, which works to reduce the root causes of poverty, underdevelopment, and social and economic inequality. And Steve Harrison is WFAE's political reporter who has been covering transit now for a very long time. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Robert waved at the camera. This is radio, Robert. Good morning. Leigh, I'm going to start with you. I have heard this referred to as a 1-cent sales tax for transit. I've also seen it as a 1% increase in the sales tax for transit. Which is it?
It's a different way to express the same concept. But before I answer that, let me just say good morning. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation. This really is an incredible opportunity for our residents. Essentially, if you're going to make a $1 purchase, it would increase that purchase by 1 penny. And if you were to make a $10 purchase, it would increase the cost of that purchase by a dime. So, it's that's what it's meant. That's what is meant by 1% or 1 cent.
Okay. We've been talking about this plan for years on this program and other venues as well. And last year, legislative leaders said they didn't like the plan as we had constituted it, so we changed it. And this year, it was given, even with the changes, a 50-50 chance of getting through the legislature. But then it did, and it did quickly, within weeks, actually. Why? What or who made that happen, Leigh?
Well, you're right. We have had our transit dreams in neutral for a very, very long time. And until recently, there was really no encouragement and no realistic prospect that they were going to get into gear. And so you're correct that this is an amazing development that we here in Mecklenburg County have been given the ability. We're on the cusp after the Board of County Commissioners takes up some final pieces of business. It is likely that the residents will finally be able to decide for ourselves what our transit dreams and futures ought to be and how we want to develop as a region. And I think one of the reasons that that we do have this breakthrough is because we were able to come to a compromise. Everybody didn't get everything they wanted, and that's democracy. It's important, I believe, as a local elected official, to move the region forward. And there are things that I would like that I don't always get, but if we are able to make important progress and forward motion that benefits the residents, that's what we owe the community, is of functional government. So I'm really proud of the leaders and the leaders locally, the leaders in the General Assembly. I'm grateful to them. I'm very grateful to our business leaders who all came together to come up with something that I do think, we can talk about how it will benefit this region in an enormous way.
Robert, I know that Leigh just mentioned that this final deal is a compromise, as are most things in a democracy, and not everybody gets everything that they want. And there are people in Matthews who are upset about this because they're not getting the Silver Line light rail. I know you have your concerns, which we will discuss in particular a little bit later on in the program. But do you feel, as this transit plan morphed several times over time, that you and those who share your concerns had an opportunity to express yourselves and were in fact listened to?
No, I don't. I think what we got from the very beginning was what we would call the rub. So at the very beginning, what we got from both county commission and city council and bureaucrats, when we started raising our issues was, well, we can't give you all of these answers because we don't want to put those answers out because we don't want to make the General Assembly mad and them not do anything. Then we got to the point to where the bills were introduced. And we came back and we brought these same concerns. And they were like, well, the main thing that we want to do is make sure that this gets into committee and we can solve it in committee. And then it made it into committee and nothing was addressed. And now it's the law. So now when we go places, we hear them say, and I'll give you an example, Tuesday morning breakfast, we had, former Secretary Anthony Fox, he was making all these suggestions. Well, we know the plan's not perfect, but what we think you should do is stay on city and the county to make sure that y'all are heard and you're making sure that y'all have a role. Well, it's too late now, Anthony. The role has been defined. So change isn't happening for us. Change is happening on top of us. So like Leigh said, y'all will get into an argument back and forth of whether it's 1 cent, whether it's 1%. For us, the taxpayers, it's a 14% increase in sales tax at one time for a regressive tax, which poor people pay the majority of out of their taxes. So this doesn't benefit the poor people. It takes their money and reallocates it to the way that the General Assembly thinks that it fits for them.
I want to come back to that 14% figure and figure out where you came up with that in a moment. But Steve, our original transit plan, not the one that legislators criticized, but the original plan, which goes back decades, called, I believe, for 5 rail lines crisscrossing Mecklenburg County. The one that legislators criticized was one of the latest plans that included a silver line from Matthews to Belmont. They saw that plan in the legislature as too train-centric, so we revised that plan, and that upset Matthews because it didn't guarantee light rail to that city. Tricia Cotham proposed a slightly different structure for funding that might have restored that option, but that is not the one that passed. What is in the one that passed? What are we getting?
Yeah, the compromise bill that basically Republican legislators mandated on the city was that 40% of the money from the tax be spent on roads. And that was pretty much non-negotiable for this to go through. So that was, the city was kind of locked into that 40% number. I think the debate was over the remaining 60% of the money from the sales tax. The original kind of agreement hammered out by the managers of the Mecklenburg municipalities was that 40% would go to rail, 20% buses. The original Tricia Cotham bill just gave the new transit authority freedom to spend that 60% any way they wanted. And like you said, Mike, in theory, that could open the door to lengthening the Silver Line, getting it closer to Matthews. But then the final bill that was passed reverted back to the original 40-40-20 split. It arguably handcuffs the new transit authority a little bit because it mandates how they spent the money. And I'm not sure why we went from the 60%, which House Speaker Destin Hall, he seemed fine with that, back to 40-40-20. But that was I think that was a pretty big decision, and that's one that that does lock the new transit authority in to how they're going to spend the money, and that can only be changed in Raleigh.
And give us the breakdown, the 40-40-20.
So
40%
40% to roads, and also not just roads, but things like sidewalks, street lights, kind of road related projects. No more than 40% for rail transit, and then the rest of the 20% for things like buses. And then the big new thing, the big new thing in the plan is this micro transit, where CATS is creating their own Uber-like service, and they're going to expand that all over Mecklenburg County. A lot of that 20% of the money is going to go to that.
And in fact, WCNC TV this morning is reporting that they have eliminated, as of today, I think, several bus lines and replace it with that microtransit, and they're going to let people ride that microtransit for free for about a week just to get them accustomed to it. But am I correct in saying, Steve, that the money that is earmarked for roads, much of that money can be spent by the individual towns in Mecklenburg County the way they see fit on road and sidewalk and infrastructure projects? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, there was a provision put in the bill that so the city of Charlotte and the Mecklenburg towns already spend money today on roads. And back in the budget presentation this spring, Charlotte City Manager Marcus Jones made a comment. He talked about how the new road money they would be getting, which is about $100 million a year, was going to really help their budget. And he essentially said they were going to take, the new money coming in for roads and well, let me back up. They were going to take the money that they spend today on roads, or a significant part of it, or part of it, and spend it on other things. And so it was arguably kind of like the lottery, where the new lottery money for education was just going to wasn't going to supplement, but it was going to replace. And the new bill puts some limits on that, and it says that the city of Charlotte and the existing towns must spend a certain level of road money going forward into the future.
But both Robert and Leigh want to comment on this. Robert had his hand up first. Go ahead, Robert.
So I'll also say, on top of what Steve said, here's the irony. The General Assembly came back and said, City of Charlotte, you best not reallocate any of this money for roads. But it didn't put the same stipulation on itself. So in the future, when you see the General Assembly continue to cut our Pell Grant money, when you see the General Assembly start saying, since the Charlotte is raising money, we're going to give you less. And we get to the point that we eventually start having to pave Albemarle Road, North Tryon and South Tryon. Remember, the General Assembly did that to you. They took your road money and returned it around on yourself and going to say, you Charlotteans and Mecklenburgians pay for it. The main reason they gave us this permission is because this is a pilot for them to do this around the state, for them to get all of the counties and cities to pay for road money out of all of their taxpayers and reduce the General Assembly's obligation to contribute. Mark my
Leigh,
words.
that is one of
Yeah.
Robert's organization's key objections to this, as I read through them yesterday. And what about that? Because some legislators have said, "Gee, if Charlotte can do this, maybe my community can do this," which is kind of a veiled way of saying exactly what Robert just said.
Yeah, so the local road money is for local roads. It's not for state roads. So I think the reason why other counties across the state are interested is because all North Carolina is a desirable place. We have a lot of people moving here, and localities cannot keep up with the infrastructure needed to support the great success that we're having. And so I think that's why there's interest. And I see that we're coming to a break, but when I come back, I hope you'll let me continue.
I will let you continue. That's
Thank
how
you.
this works. Leigh Altman's with us. She's the chair of the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Robert Dawkins with ActionNC, and Steve Harrison with WFAE News. We're continuing in just a second.
Tomorrow on Charlotte Talks, the NAACP convention is set to kick off in Charlotte. Thousands are expected to be at the Charlotte Convention Center for this 4-day event, the theme for which is the fierce urgency of now. Martin Luther King Jr. coined the phrase in 1963, but organizers believe it describes conditions today. We preview the convention tomorrow at 9 on WFAE.
Quality information is getting harder to come by these days.
The crisis in local news is bigger than you think.
55 million people live in communities with limited or no access to local news, a reliable source of information about their communities. But what can we do about it? We bring you a conversation on solutions from the Aspen Ideas Festival next time on 1A.
You can catch 1A today at 10 on WFAE, where support comes from the Charlotte Eye, Ear, Nose, and Throat Associates, serving the Charlotte region since 1923 with cataract evaluation, same-day ENT appointments, allergy relief, and more. Details at ceenta.com/appointments. And Mazda of South Charlotte, committed to drivers that share Mazda's passion that cars make driving matter. More at mazdaofsouthcharlotte.com.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the transit plan, which finally passed through the General Assembly, was signed into law by Governor Stein, now goes to the Mecklenburg County Commission for a vote. We'll see how that goes. I think we can say with certainty that it will pass, and then it will go to a referendum for voters to decide on in November. And we're talking about this with Leigh Altman, Mecklenburg County Commissioner at large, also a member of the Metropolitan Transit Commission. I misspoke. She was the chair. Vi Lyles, Mayor Lyles, is currently the chair. But that's a recent development, and I guess I screwed it up. Robert Dawkins is the political director for Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Ethics Coalition at ActionNC, and Steve Harrison reports on all this and more for WFAE News. So I had to interrupt you in the middle of your comment. Leigh Altman, go ahead and finish up what you were talking about.
So thank you so much. So just going to 30,000 feet, why are we doing this? We know, and I hear you talk about it a lot, Mike, that we have more than 100 people moving here a day. We all experience traffic congestion. I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia. When I first moved here, it was lovely. And every day that goes by, it becomes more and more impossible to get from point A to point B. And furthermore, we have a real focus in the county and in the city with upward economic mobility for our residents who are low income and have had barriers to entry, which are legacy effects of segregation and the history of this community and this nation. So the reason why this is so important in its current incarnation is that our transit system right now has, bus and we have rail. And our current bus system has exactly one route, Mike, that has 15-minute headways, meaning a bus comes every 15 minutes. In all of Mecklenburg County, we have one route where you can get picked up every 15 minutes. And that does not serve our residents who depend upon transit. It's 60% of whom come from communities of color. That is no way to get to access to opportunity. That's no way to get to work and to get to affordable housing. So this will enable us to expand our bus system to an additional 450,000 residents. It will enable us to put 15-minute headways in every quadrant of the county. It will. I see you're trying to say something, so I'll pause.
Well, I see your point, and I think many people have said that, and it also speaks to one of Robert Dawkins' concerns that this is a regressive tax. And although it may benefit in some ways lower income people who are the people that take the bus, let's be honest about this, for the most part. Not everybody is poor that takes the bus, but there are people who take the bus who must take the bus because that is their only option. But the sales tax will impact them, it seems to me, more than it will affect somebody making $100,000 a year, because everybody has to buy necessities, toothpaste, food, etc., clothing, books for school and things like that. And those are the people who are going to work on the bus at two jobs that in some cases barely make ends meet for those folks. So I know there are other ways to finance this. This was the way we chose to go, but won't the burden fall disproportionately upon lower income individuals, Leigh?
Well, I'll tell you something. This will, the Leading on Opportunity Task Force, which brought together the best minds of our community to develop a game plan to help people experience economic mobility and improve outcomes, said that our transportation system here in Mecklenburg County is a major barrier to people having access. And we've made great progress under the Leading on Opportunity Task Force for their other recommendations around affordable housing, around access to pre-K, and other important factors that go into the social determinants of health and outcomes. We have made no progress with transportation, Mike, and we will not be able to make any progress if we don't get a new funding source. The only other opportunity would be property tax. And property tax is very harmful to low-income residents, whereas with sales tax, 30% of the revenue that this will bring in will be paid by tourists and visitors. And furthermore, this new funding source will entitle us to compete for approximately $6 billion in federal money. That's money that's going to go to another community to build out their transit system because they got a local funding source. So these, between the visitors who pay sales tax and the federal funds that we will now become eligible for by this new funding source, it greatly helps to increase the return on investment for all of our residents. And it's also important to know that food, groceries, housing, medicine, electricity, and gas, all of those items are exempt from this the sales tax.
Some groceries, not all. Robert, I know you
Prepared
want to.
Yeah,
I know you want to get in on this. Go ahead.
so it's so much on this. First of all, you can never, ever fix upward mobility by raising a sales tax because that's regressive and you're asking the poorest people that you're saying you're trying to uplift themselves out of their pocket. That's one. Second, when we say, oh, 30% of this money is going to be paid by tourists, no, it's going to be paid by people paying the tourist tax, and that's poor people. So all of the people in Charlotte that live in a hotel because they can't afford to live anywhere else, they're going to pay it double. They're going to pay the sales tax, plus they're going to pay the hotel motel tax because they're stuck living in a hotel. They're also going to pay the prepared food tax because they live in a hotel and don't have a kitchen. So every time that they go and have to provide food for their kids that's prepared, they're going to pay a tax. So let's look at this all together. Poor people are going to pay 10%. The poorest people in Charlotte will pay 10% now. They already pay 7.25. Add this new transportation tax, they're paying 8.25. If they live in a hotel before they get displaced, like the lamplighter or any of that, they're paying the motel tax. So now they're at 9.25. And since they don't have a kitchen and they're having to eat at the McDonald's, they're paying 10.25. So how do you take all of that and say that it's going to benefit people? Secondly, we knock doors for a living. Nobody has ever said that increasing the bus to 15 minutes is going to help them. They don't care if the bus comes in 15 minutes. They care if the bus comes on time. And if the bus is still stuck on traffic, you can say it's going to come in 5 minutes. But if they're sitting there with gridlock, if they're sitting there and waiting, that bus ain't coming any quicker. So it's all a bunch of message frame as opposed to messaging for the people.
Leigh, has anybody done a calculation on what this increase in sales tax will cost A, the average person, and B, low-income individuals? Has anybody run the calculation on it?
Yes, it's estimated that the average household in Mecklenburg County, it would cost about $20 a month. And for low-income houses, it would be approximately $11 a month. And I note that the cost of owning a car is about $12,000 a year. And that's really prohibitive for a lot of people. And so we have a moral obligation to create a transit system that people can rely upon to get to, again, housing and healthcare and food and jobs and education. We haven't really talked a lot about how it will work. I mentioned that the bus system is very limited and where it has a real regular frequency that people can rely upon, just one route. And this will, again, expand it to all the parts of the county. But what's really exciting also is microtransit. It's essentially an on-demand share ride service that you can use almost like Uber with, to call to your home and to take to
But
anywhere
that,
within the
but
zone
that's only
or
at the moment. It's only available in the northern part of the county. I know that this plan will allow it to expand to I think 17 or 18 other areas. But will that be sufficient? Will there be enough of these small vehicles available on demand to handle the need?
so right now there is a pilot, as you referenced, in North Mecklenburg, and the community seems to love it. There's a lot of uptake there, and that's wonderful. And we have established or continuing to plan for 18 other high density zones across the community. And so for $2.10, you can call the rideshare to your door and then be taken, as I said, to any destination within the zone or to a bus line or a rail line and essentially cross the entire county for $2.20 because all the transfers are free. And if you are a senior citizen, it's $1.10. And I have had the opportunity to talk to, for example, residents. And I was talking to someone who lives in a senior living center in Matthews, talking to someone who lives in South Charlotte. It's also about our burgeoning older population, people who are reaching a place in their lives where they may not feel comfortable driving. And right now, we don't have a transit system that meets the needs of them. I was at a job training center where all the employees there have vision impairment, and they have to spend basically half of their daily salary on an Uber just to get to work. And so, it really, and then of course there's just the issue of we're going to have a terrible quality of life and businesses are not going to relocate their economic opportunities here if we don't become proactive in solving our transit future and laying down the structures and putting in place the processes that will allow us to really move people efficiently.
So I have to let Robert into this because he's about to chew through his mic cable. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, so when I'm other places, I do microtransit myself. So let me tell you why you can't count microtransit as being this great thing that people want. One, we sell it as it's like Uber. It's not. Uber is I call, Uber picks me up and take me where I'm going. This is more like a van share. I call you and all of my neighbors call you. It prioritizes, picks us all up, and we're all going in different directions. And hopefully it gets us there. So let's give you an example. I live in Hidden Valley and I call and I live on Cinderella. But right before me, the neighbor called and they live on one of the other streets. And another neighbor called and they live on another street. I'm third in the list. So they pick all three of us up. The first neighbor is going up towards Harris. The other person's going back towards Sugar Creek. And I'm going back toward North Tryon. There's no guarantee you're going to get me there any quicker. Also, microtransit only works if the connections that's going to be there move quick. So let's say that I'm in Greer Heights and I'm trying to go somewhere up to Betty's Ford. There's no cross buses that they're going to get me to. It's not in the zone. And so basically, they're just going to get me to the nearest bus that takes me uptown regularly, which is the bus at the top of my street. So
So Steve,
basically, but basically, if they had just left the in-neighborhood routes alone, it would have been just as quick as adding this first mile, last mile. It sounds great. Oh, and let's not also forget, the person pays $2.20. The taxpayer pays around $50 a ride. The sales tax is going to collapse on itself. When Gastonia started microtransit, it was $2. They've already raised it to $2.50.
Steve, as Leigh Altman has said, you can't let what I think what did she say? Voting on compromise does not. You can't let the perfect get in the way of. I'm misquoting you, but in other
Don't
words,
let
nothing is.
perfect be the enemy of good.
Okay, but you've done a lot of reporting on this over the years, Steve. You've taken a very close look at how Charlotte Transit has been operating now, and at this plan and what it promises. Will this plan, from what you know, improve bus service? Because you point out that the plan has very few, if any, new bus routes in it. And the push will be, as Robert pointed out, to increase frequency, which is not necessarily the ideal thing because you can bring a bus every 15 minutes, but if it gets stuck in traffic, it ain't going anywhere.
I mean, I do think that so there's about 15 routes that are on roughly every 20 minutes today, and they'll go to every 15 minutes. And I think if you ride those routes, I mean, I think going to every 15 will be a big benefit for you. This idea in the transit industry is that every 15 minutes is this point at which you don't really need a schedule. You just kind of show up to the stop and you can expect a bus to come pretty quickly. I think that kind of the bigger question here in Charlotte, and not only in Charlotte, but around the country, is kind of the huge societal shift that's taken place in the last 10 years. The first was the rise of private rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft, and then now work from home. And what we've seen in Charlotte is that the service levels for CATS have stayed pretty close to where they were 10 years ago. I think the number of hours offered is down about 9%. But CATS is only carrying a little more than half of the riders it did 10 years ago. And so there's been a shift in the way society gets around. And I think that's going to be a big challenge in terms of if we put more service on the street, more buses, microtransit, what will be the demand to use it?
But that's also an argument against more trains because trains are permanent, buses move. You've been covering transit, as I said, for years. You discovered that with the toll lanes now in place that seemed to be working for many people in the northern part of I-77, that a commuter could actually drive their car or even take a express bus from Davidson to Uptown faster than the Red Line is likely to get them there when it's in operation. You've also tracked these ridership levels over time, which have been, as you say, steadily falling and certainly not recovering from the pandemic in any great way. Was any of this taken into account when this plan was cobbled together?
That's hard to say. The thing with the Red Line, there was a period a couple of years ago when CATS was considering was unsure whether they were going to build the train, and CATS was considering if they didn't have the train, just using express bus service in the toll lanes. And CATS had their own presentation that showed that the buses could probably get you uptown a few minutes faster. In terms of how much of this has been taken into consideration, it's hard to say. CATS hasn't shown a lot of their work, and they haven't shown projections of if we spend this amount of money, we think ridership will increase by X percent. That's just not really part of CATS's equations. Like when we did the deciding which trains to build, the ridership for each line wasn't really taken into account. So hard to say, Mike.
Leigh?
So I wonder, Mike, with the folks who are listening, if anyone has had the privilege of traveling outside Mecklenburg County or outside the United States, if they've been in communities where they were able to catch a bus and do their entire trip using public transportation. And I know when I've had that experience, I come home and say, why can't we do that here? And so, when you talk about ridership, folks don't want to, we have riders of necessity whom we have a moral duty to serve better because they don't have access. But for riders of choice, I believe we will have tremendous uptake when we actually make service frequent, available, and accessible. And we just don't have that right now. And we will not achieve that if we don't invest more resources because our current service is maxed out.
So I want to come back to that, both for anticipatory rise in ridership when the bus system is improved and how that impacts what Robert calls captive riders as well. We'll do that when we come back. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
On the next 1A, quality information is getting harder to come by. 55 million people live in communities with limited access to local news. A reliable source for information about their communities. Hear more about ways to fix it in a conversation from the Aspen Ideas Festival. That's at 10 a.m. on WFAE.
Newsworthy, the daily news podcast from WFAE, takes you on a journey through the stories shaping our community. You'll hear the latest headlines from the WFAE news team, plus insightful conversations with the people who call the Charlotte region home. Subscribe to Newsworthy today. Find us on your favorite podcast platform or at wfae.org/newsworthy.
I'm Robert Krulwich from Radiolab. We're told that smell triggers memories in the brain. If you're in your car, let's try something. Roll up your windows and inhale. What do you remember? Like the perfume on a certain person, a favorite dog, a diaper moment, perhaps. There are some memories you cherish and others that just linger. How about contributing this barrel of aroma that is your car to your favorite public radio station? And you might even get a tax deduction.
Just head to WFAE.org/cars to get started.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the transit plan, which has now passed through the General Assembly. It has been signed into law. The Mecklenburg County Commission will take it up probably in September, and it is likely to be on the ballot as a referendum for you to vote on in November. Leigh Altman is here. She's a commissioner at large on Mecklenburg County Commission and a member of the Transit Commission. Robert Dawkins is political director for Safety, Accountability, Fairness, and Ethics, the Ethics Coalition at ActionNC, and Steve Harrison reports on all of this for WFAE News. First of all, and I know you want to continue your comment, Leigh, but is the commission likely to vote yes on this? Isn't that a foregone conclusion?
So, yeah, well, on July 30th, we will have a special called meeting just to review the language of the referendum that we have to employ under the PAVE Act that was signed in by the governor. And then on August 6th, we will be having a public hearing for us to take that further input from the public. So,
but isn't that pro forma? I mean, it's too late to do anything about it now. The bill has been passed. It's done. You're not going to change it because then you can't take it back to the legislature. It won't happen. So isn't it aren't you just going to vote on it up or down?
Well,
no matter what
right,
people say?
Commissioners have to vote on whether or not to send it to put it on the ballot, to send it as a referendum to voters. And I certainly will be sending it to the voters, and I hope my colleagues will as well.
Okay, so do you expect, given the decline in ridership that has happened since the pandemic, do you expect that with the changes in the bus system and money being allocated to things like microtransit, extension of the Silver Line, rapid transit buses to Matthews, and everything else that this bill provides, do you expect that you will see a rise in ridership?
I do, absolutely. I would love to use the bus, even though I have a car. I think there are a lot of people who are not riders of necessity who would, for various reasons, quality of life, for environmental reasons, would like to get out of their cars if we had the kind of system that other communities have.
And Robert, you talk about captive riders. These are the people who don't own cars, who must ride the bus to get to the grocery store, to their jobs, to their doctor's appointments, etc. These are captive people who will always take the bus. That's their only choice.
Yep.
So does this plan improve their experience?
No. Again, they keep talking about it's going to get you a 15-minute headway. What captive riders want is a headway and upward mobility. And getting to your job does not paying you any more money 5 minutes faster is not changing their life. What you will see is captive riders stuck doing whatever they can to get to work, and these riders out of convenience benefiting, driving by looking where they're going to build their new Starbucks and where they're going to move to displace the people that are captive riders.
This sales tax will produce billions, billions, billions of dollars of tax money over the years to be earmarked directly for transit. There's no question about that. That will happen. But is there enough, Leigh, to do everything that you want to do, that this bill allows us to do? Robert's already referred to how microtransit might collapse on itself. And I ask because years ago when we built the Blue Line, the original half-cent sales tax for transit was supposed to fund the Blue Line and the Blue Line extension and the Red Line and the Silver Line rapid transit bus from Uptown to Matthews and the streetcar. It ended up funding only the Blue Line and the Blue Line extension, and the city took over operation of the streetcar because there wasn't enough money. Is there enough money in this plan?
Mike, I'm so glad you asked that question because it really underscores the need to act now, immediately, because we have really urgent transit and infrastructure needs. And every year we delay, they grow by the billions. And what we can afford to build with the money we have shrinks. So that is why it is so important that we act. You know, I know I can't do everything that I would like to do. I would love to have had light rail all the way to Matthews. Absolutely. That would be the best case outcome. But my most important obligation as an at-large county commissioner and serving on the Metropolitan Transit Commission is to move people, because I respectfully disagree that it's not about getting someone to their job 5 minutes earlier. It's about getting them to their job at all. It's about getting them to an interview at all. It's about giving them the ability to access housing that may be a little more affordable, a little bit farther from the core of the city, and being able to get there so they can have a place to live and get to work. And
Steve,
so,
does this plan do that?
I think that the big benefit of the plan is the idea, we talked about earlier, there's not a lot of new bus routes. There'll be more frequency on the routes. The big part of I think the selling point in the new part of the plan is this idea of micro transit that Commissioner Altman talked about, where you can, it picks you up at your house. It can take you within the zone, maybe the doctor's office, the grocery store, or take you to the train or the bus. I think that's a really new idea, and we'll see how that plays out. Mike, to your earlier point, I do think it's important to go back. We've had 2 other votes on transit sales taxes in this county. 1998, when we did the original half-cent sales tax, and then 2007, when the county decided not to repeal it. In both times, CATS in the city put forth that long list of rail projects that they said that the tax would be able to fund. And it when you look back now, in both instances, it was a big overpromise. That the Red Line was supposed to have been built with the existing half-cent sales tax. There was supposed to be bus rapid transit along Independence, and they just ran out of money. And this is it's just kind of common in Charlotte and across the country. Transit is very expensive, and it tends to cost more than you think, and the operating dollars are really high. And so if you look back at the past and then you look at the list of projects that the city believes they can build, I think it's fair to look at the current list with a little bit of skepticism on the rail side, whether there'll be enough money in 20, 30 years to do it all.
Robert.
Yeah. Besides what we're talking about is they promised the blue line was going to be like 500 million, and it came in at like 700 million. And then the next line was going to be like 700 million, and it was 1.2 million. This is all good. We don't even know on just the better bus piece how much it's going to cost to rebuild the transit center. We haven't even seen the cost on that. So I'm so skeptical on all of this. But what I can tell you is when this does blow up and we don't have enough money, watch them then go and take that quarter-cent sales tax that they're sitting on and say, oh, by the way, we need to use this too.
One of the things, go ahead, Leigh.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say, we've been talking about bus and light rail, or rail, and that's super important. But I want also to address roads, because we have a lot of problems with local roads. I myself have replaced my tire more than once because I went over a pothole, which is really expensive and can, throw you off being able to show up to work. So the road money is really significant, and it will really ensure that our residents are not having to navigate dangerous conditions. It will improve access to sidewalks and street lighting. And so that's a really important thing across Mecklenburg County, which, just in case residents listening, know we are talking about the 3 towns in the north: Cornelius, Davidson, Huntersville; the 3 towns in the south: Matthews, Mint Hill, and Pineville; and of course the city of Charlotte, and areas of the ETJ. Real fast, orphan roads. If you live in Grand Palisades Parkway and you are concerned by the fact that no governmental entity is maintaining that emergency evacuation route, because of our advocacy, I want the residents to know that repair of that road is eligible out of this pot of money. But without this pot of money, there's no solve. And so this is incredibly important for that issue, which I know we've talked about also.
Robert?
So yeah, again, I think that we're sitting here and we're pitching people on stuff without thinking of the externalities. And so when we're talking roads, wasn't it y'all that just covered that the General Assembly's already told Mecklenburg and some other states because of Helene, they've got to cut some of their road money? Once the General Assembly cuts it, they don't give it back. And what we've seen in the past is the General Assembly's not giving us that much of our power money. I just want folks to know that when you look at this in a few years, watch and see if there isn't a major reduction in the amount of money the General Assembly is giving Charlotte out of power money and other money for our roads. And I still think they will cut the money that they're going to give us to maintain state roads.
Let's talk about something else that's going to happen as a result of this. At one point, as part of the legislation that the General Assembly was considering, the Metropolitan Transit Commission was to be replaced by a transit authority. That is still the case. Is that correct, Leigh?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is. Will they be responsible for executing this plan, or will CATS be responsible for executing at least the bus and rail portion of this plan? Who's responsible?
So if this were to pass, what would happen is a transition from the Metropolitan Transit Commission being the governing policy board for Charlotte Area Transit System, or CATS. That would phase out, and what would be phased in would be a new transit authority, which would have the city of Charlotte would have 13 appointments, which would include 3 from the business community. The county would have 12 appointments, which would include 6 from the towns of Mecklenburg. The state legislators would have 2 appointments, and the governor would have an appointment. And so yeah, we would have and the other good thing about this is that it would allow our neighboring counties, if they want to contribute and participate in our system, there's a mechanism for them to do that, which gets us to, again, the regionalism that we need in order to continue to recruit great companies here and to help our residents cross municipalities and county boundary lines easily and quickly to access upward economic mobility.
Robert, I know that you are concerned about accountability for whatever happens as a result of this. If the referendum passes and this comes into being, this isn't the plan that planners originally envisioned. It is a compromise, and it's a plan that has had a lot of stakeholders' hands touching it, manipulating it, changing it over time. But isn't that always the case with every policy or plan that gets enacted? Doesn't everything change from the original idea? Why is this concerning to you?
Sure, it's concerning to me because the main people impacted have no seats on the board. There's not one seat. So business community who's chipping in not one dime to implement this plan. Now, they are spending $1 million to make sure it passes, and they will be paying no corporate income tax, no corporate taxes in 2030, are not contributing anything, but they get seats on the board. The General Assembly is not contributing anything, but they got seats on the board. But people that need to ride the bus, like captive riders, people that work for the bus, like organized labor, people that would know things about the plight of people with disabilities, they get not one seat on this board.
So, Leigh, I have 3 minutes. Let's keep our answers short from here on out, please. I know you want to
Sure.
jump in here. Go ahead.
Sure. I just want to say that in terms of the appointments, if you have been watching the county commission or watching city council, we try very hard out of the people who apply for our many, many appointments to appoint folks who have that diverse experience.
But they're not there.
Well, I mean, people apply, and then from the list, we have a lot of intentionality to bring diverse representation to our boards, 100%.
But they're not there.
What do you mean they're not there?
Are they there? Are these people being represented?
I mean, currently with CATS, we have fantastic advisory boards who I think are wonderful and diverse. But
so,
yes.
Ultimately, who will take credit or who will take the blame for whatever happens as a result of this plan?
I think that as we go forward, if we are successful, we have the duty and the obligation at every stage and at every decision moment. Who will be the CEO of the new transit authority? Who will have who will be appointed? How will we work on negotiating those contracts? How will we deliver service? At every single moment, we will have an opportunity to act with fidelity to serve our most vulnerable residents. We will have an opportunity to take in the maximum amount of public input. And so it's not set it and forget it. It's to act with fidelity at every stage.
Sorry to push, but the clock is ticking. Steve, from what you know about the plan, from what you know about the history of CATS and other plans that have involved transit, what should voters be thinking about when this comes to a vote in November? Because it'll be on the ballot. What questions should they be asking themselves to arrive at an intelligent decision?
I think there's going to be a subset of voters who use transit every day and think about how the plan will help them and improve their lives. But the most of the people who vote are going to be car drivers. And so I think that they need to decide, will the new plan allow me to use transit, encourage me to use transit? And even if it doesn't, I think people need to decide, how much they're going to spend and whether it's kind of for the community good. Commissioner Altman has talked about helping the most vulnerable get to work. Robert, has felt like that the burden is too much on low-income residents through the sales tax. So I think that most of the people deciding on this are going to be kind of thinking about the plan for others and the community good, yes or no?
In 15 seconds, that's all I got, Robert. How will you judge the success or failure of this plan or in 5 or 10 years?
I'll judge it by how many Black and brown people are still left in the city, because this is going to be the biggest displacement event since Brooklyn.
Same question, Leigh.
Whether or not we've been able to give people access to great jobs and affordable housing and upward economic mobility. I want people to be able to raise their household incomes. And this is the pathway.
And what happens if voters say no?
Then we're at square zero for the future. And that would be I think a loss, a terrible loss.
And with that, we have to stop. Leigh Altman is Mecklenburg County Commissioner at Large, a member of the Metropolitan Transit Commission. Robert Dawkins is with ActionNC, and Steve Harrison joined us from WFAE News. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer is Gabe Altieri. The senior producer